to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay.
Welcome to a special episode of Pit Lane Parlay. We're going to call this first episode the Lost Tracks edition. We're going to start with my home track in Nazareth Speedway, and I am joined by one of the guys from the Save Nazareth group here with Tim Silliman. Tim, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out to me, Mike.
No problem. So for those who may not be familiar, Nazareth is located near me, about an hour and 15 minutes north. And Tim, take us through the founding and the real old school of what was then called Nazareth National Speedway.
All right. So I'm not sure how many people actually know. There was actually a horse track closer in like middle of town back in the 1850s. So it was like your old style, of a horse. Like I think it was like a mile or so, or maybe it was a half mile. But it was around like 1900 or so. They moved out of town to where the site of where the track is right now, and they built a half-mile track, and that's currently like where the Giant and all those stores are, right on 191 and 248. So they didn't actually start auto races until about like 1910 or so, and those were like motor polo. I don't know if you've seen some of those screenshots where they were like on like old like tractors, I guess, if you will, and it was like water polo or like a horse, like what you're used to seeing with a polo stick, and you're driving around in a car and you're smacking balls around. So that didn't last very long, but it's very interesting to note that was actually a thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm just reading my notes here. Wikipedia calls it auto polo. And it actually drew a crowd of, at the time, which I guess is pretty big, and 10,000, 11,000 people, which is pretty substantial for kind of a rural area in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So going a bit further down, the first like large race was hosted after World War II. It was hosted by AAA. If I'm not sure, like a lot of the younger people, of course I'm saying younger, I'm not that old either, but I'm sure there's a lot of folks that probably don't know about AAA and the things that they used to do like that back then. And for then, a large race was about 30 something cars or so, and they crammed that in with 11,000 people or so. So that was a pretty big event back then. So a second track was built in 1966. So that was the larger 1 mile dirt. Well, it was actually 1/1/8. It was an odd length, but not a lot of people probably know that there was actually 2 dirt tracks. There was a larger oval, and then there was a smaller half mile. So that was built in 66, and which is the current iteration, or like the current exact location of that track. So like during the 1960s, that's when the bigger track hosted like USAC events and whatnot, and it was actually, I think it was in 66 that Al Unser beat out Mario. So like the big time hero, was beaten out by somebody that's not from the area. So I'm sure that was a fun thing to watch.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody associates the track with the Andretti's, obviously, since they now pretty much all live down the street or nearby. But Al Unser is actually the guy who won the first USAC race there.
Yeah, and you had like big names, like Al, and like I think it was that David Rudiman's dad?
Yeah, Buzzy Rudiman.
Yeah, Yeah, like you had those old school names that like not a lot of people think about because they just go, oh, it's Nazareth, so it's got to be Andretti, right? But yeah, the large oval closed down. I think it was around 1971, but the smaller track stayed open that hosted your weekly dirt night stuff. So like your modifieds and your legends sort of stuff. So that went on while that track was closed, and it wasn't until 1982 where the both tracks were purchased by a local businessman, Blindy Vicardi. I'm not sure if a lot of people know that name, but that was like a local PA guy that he was a track promoter and whatnot. So he bought both tracks. But sadly, with running both tracks, that gets quite expensive. So in 87, I believe it was 87 that was purchased by Penske, and then the large oval was paved over. Well, it was actually slightly shortened and then paved over. And then the small dirt oval was sold to Laneco, which for those people that don't know about Laneco, it was an old grocery store chain. For us millennials, you may or may not be old enough to know about that. But so like after that was paved, you had the NASCAR Busch Series and the trucks, and then you had Whelen modifieds, and they had kart, obviously. So that all ran pretty much up until it closed in 2004. And then, the track was then sold off as Penske was getting out of the track game, which he owned Michigan and Auto Club. And so like he was starting to get out of that, and he was starting to sell those off. So he actually sold that to ISC, which is your International Speedway Corporation. Love them or hate them. That's up to you, I suppose. So, as like the big expansion was happening with NASCAR, you had these bigger corporations buying up tracks, and what they would do, they would go, well, there's a market somewhere else. So as opposed to having somebody else own it and compete, we'll just buy it and then close it. So you had that happen to like tracks all over across the U.S. So they actually moved the Nazareth date to Watkins Glen, and I'm sure there's some people that may not know, but those stands on the front stretch are actually the stands that I used to sit in when it was here. So it's kind of frustrating when you go to the Glen and like, those stands don't belong here. So that's kind of like the general rundown of like what transpired. So, there's those big tracks like Indianapolis that, that's been open since like 1914 or whatever. So like there's
early 1900s.
Yeah, so there's always been a track here, whether it was in town or the smaller dirt oval or the larger one. Like there's always been something there, and it's kind of it's kind of sad to see it when I was born in '91, so like that's where my dad took me. I lived up the street, so I could hear it. Like I was not even like a mile away. So whenever cart was there, I'd go outside. I'm like, Michael's here. I was all excited, and but we don't have that anymore, sadly. So
yeah, I'm sure people on the show have heard me say a bunch of times I used to run around the grandstands while my dad was still working for CART, but it was such a cool facility. Some of my notes that I'm going to share with everybody here. The track, when it was paved, was actually it was advertised as a 1.125 mile track, again, just like the dirt track. I'm sorry, a 1 mile paved track, but the actual measurement was less than a mile. So teams figured out how to really get a good fuel strategy there. And once it was officially measured, it was actually 0.9 miles. So, not really not quite a mile, although it's essentially the same thing. And the IRL in the last 1, 2, 3 years of the track used a measurement of 0.935 for timing and scoring, although NASCAR kept it as 1 mile until 2004. And I do always laugh. I don't particularly, as everybody knows, pay close attention to NASCAR. But when you see Watkins Glen, you see those stands, you go, oh, those look really familiar. I remember the first time they were up there, the grandstands were there. You feel a little sad because Nazareth was the first place I saw any sort of racing, and it was one of the first tracks in the northeastern area. Another track that I'll cover in the coming weeks is Trenton Speedway, which is also an early,
very unique,
very very unique and very early 1900s track. Is another one, so it's kind of a forgotten area by both open wheel and NASCAR standards in today's world. But obviously we have Richmond coming back next year, which is great. Let's look at some of the winners here. It's pretty cool. Danny Sullivan actually won an IROC race here. As you mentioned, Al Unser won the first USAC race here. Mario Andretti won the second USAC race here.
So something to note was the old Marlboro Challenge you used to run there back, was like the late 80s, I think it was, like the big, like it was basically the all-star race but kart.
Yeah, it was. Those were fun races to watch. If you can find them online, they're definitely good. Let me ask you a question here. This is typically something I do to my co-hosts, but let me see if you can guess it here. The only person to win the kart race here in back-to-back years would be what driver? It would be 1989 and 1990.
Man, I don't want to say no. For some reason, I was going to say Little Al, but I feel like that's not right.
Yeah, you would be incorrect on that one.
I honestly wouldn't know, to be honest. So I feel bad.
No, it's all good. I appreciate all your insight on the early years of the track here. I know I didn't tell you that this would be going on beforehand, but it's actually Emerson Fittipaldi who in 89 won it with Patrick Racing and 90 won it with Penske. Nigel Mansell won here. Paul Tracy won there twice at Nazareth. And then the late, great Dan Weldon won the final race here in 2004. Let's see. I know some interesting notes. The 2000 race was actually, I believe, the week after the Indy 500 because it was postponed due to snow.
Yes. I remember that year. I was supposed to go, and I think, was that like in April? And like the whole track was covered in snow, and I didn't end up being able to go because then my mom went. And I remember that story. She was like, yeah, we went, and then Michael crashed or whatever, and then like she described it as like crashing in flames or something. I wasn't actually there, so I don't actually know how the crash happened, but I was like, oh man, just had to snow in April.
Yeah, that would be very common for the Northeast. For those who aren't from the Northeast, like Tim and I, it snows really weird times here throughout the year. But some other notables, again, another unfortunate late and great driver, Greg Moore, won in the kart Indy Lights days. The Buddy Rice won in the kart Atlantic Championship. Cristiano D'Amata. Let's see here. Robbie Buell, everybody's favorite Mike Groff, won twice here at kart Indy Lights. I think Matt will get a kick out of that one because I brought up his name a couple weeks ago. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this was Scott Dixon's first win in 2001, or was his second ever win in IndyCar?
I want to say it was his first, because I remember on Facebook when IndyCar was doing like, I don't know if it was specific to Scott or if it was to as general events throughout history, but they streamed that race on Facebook Live. And I'm pretty sure it was his first win.
Yeah, back then it was Pac West Racing. Matt's favorite driver, Elio Castroneves, won there in 2003, the second to last year. And see, Bobby Rahal, another East Coast-ish favorite, won in 1992. Let's see who won. Michael Andretti won the year I was born. That's 1987 for those keeping track at home. Let's see here. What else we had? We never had NASCAR. I don't know, whatever it is, Monster Energy Cup Series, whatever it was back then. But we had the Busch Series and some of the truck series.
Yeah. There was a note. I think it was Kenny Wallace. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but I remember there was a race. I think it was him, and he was there, and he was complaining about it being 5 turns.
Yeah, it does sound familiar. I don't know either. It probably was Kenny Wallace because he says a lot of ridiculous things. But I don't recall. And if you follow Marco Andretti, you saw a more recent picture of Nazareth, which is kind of depressing, but I will find that and put it on our social media for when we release the episode here. But the track looks like it's probably never going to come back, but we'll end our short, lost track first lost track segment with Tim. What do you know about A, what's currently going on there, and B, how can people help out the Save Nazareth Speedway group?
All right. So here's the lowdown. Let's see. Back in September of 2018, it's been actually just been over a year. I started a petition, and just as a disclaimer, I never really believed that I was actually going to do anything. Yeah, I've gotten some flack online from like INDYCAR Reddit and stuff. They're like, "Oh, just because you make a petition, does that mean it's gonna, actually happen?" And I'm like, it was always meant as a focal point of people's voices to go, "Hey, this, we all believe in this thing." So I started this petition first, not as a means to bring the race like track back to life and bring racing, because I always felt, not like to be like morbid, but I didn't really think it was going to come back. So first, I made this by myself, and I wanted to have iRacing scan the track. Like if something good was going to come out of this, I wanted to at least have it virtually saved for as long as there's the internet, that somebody could at least enjoy it and run a virtual car and at least kind of feel, the ups and the downs, and like 5 turns, like that doesn't really happen on an oval right now. So that kind of like took off. Like the first few months, we had like a few thousand people signed. A good personal friend of mine bought a copy of the deed to like read through it, just to understand all of the ins and outs. And I still have a copy of it, and the clause is like so in depth of like, you can't do anything that's related to like motorcycles, anything that has an engine in it. Like it could even be go-karts. Like they won't let anybody run a go-kart as long as there isn't a ticket to spectate a go-kart. Like it goes as deep as saying that you can't sell racing memorabilia. Like you can't sell video games that have racing on that property. Like they didn't want anyone to do a damn thing with it. Like nothing. So that was always like the big hurdle. So like when the current owner bought the track, from what I understand, people were calling him on the phone. They're like, with all these ideas, like, "Hey, let's do this. Hey, let's do that." And I called him on the phone, and I was like, "Hey, I started this petition and got a few thousand people signed it. Like, I know nothing's really going to happen, but I wanted to bring this to your attention." And I felt like there was some sort of confusion, maybe. I don't know, not to say being older does that, but being of the computer age, I wasn't quite sure. There was a disconnect of being like, I want the races game on a video game, or races track on a video game. can we scan it? And he kind of took it as like, oh, we're going to have to clear it and maintain it. Like, I'm not going to spend the money for that. That's going to be like $500,000. And I was like, I just want like a volunteer group or something just to kind of do what Dale Jr.'s doing, just go with a lawnmower and like some weed whackers or whatever. Like, of course, it's going to be a bit more intensive than that, but just to get it fresh enough to where, go in there, do what you need to do and just let it go. So like throughout that year, I contacted Steve Myers, and I kind of feel bad, about Steve Myers because, he's the guy that, is kind of like the face of iRacing basically. And I've probably hit a chord because throughout the times that me or somebody else around me or just somebody else has spammed him about scan Nazareth. And at this point, he's like, don't even talk to me about it. Like, I've already looked into it. Can't do it. Don't care. Whatever the case. So, it's kind of kind of upsetting, but it is what it is. So like through 2019, I kind of let it go for a bit because I was getting burnt out. Like I was the only person calling all these people, calling the owner, and I'm like, I can't do this by myself. So I just let it go for a bit. And then out of nowhere, like February or so, people started contacting me, and they're like, "Hey, are you that person that made that petition?" And I was like, yeah, what's up? And like, yeah, I feel strongly about this cause. I want to join you. Well, let's get all these things going. Da, 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 da. And I was like, sure, great. I mean, it was hard enough doing it by myself. I mean, sure. So we went through all the, rounds. We reached out to Mario Andretti's business manager. We had some back and forths with him on that. Some people of the Andretti families, reached out to the page and saw us posting and started to like message us. And basically out of that front, it just kind of gave the impression that they felt like the community abandoned the track in some way, because they were noting about Pocono and like, oh, if the fans don't support Pocono, and it seemed to strike some chord of if people didn't go to Nazareth, like people certainly did go. So I don't know, I quite understand the disconnect of where that support may have not been or may have been there, but that was sort of the feeling from some of the members. I'm not going to disclose any sort of names because I feel that's a little, not good, but it's a scene kind of like that, sort of like a woe is me, like like where were you people then, so sort of a thing. And I always stress, I'm like, I'm in my 20s, like I was a teenager when that track closed. So people like my age that are kind of like rallying around me and sort of are all like born in the late, like either the late 80s or early 90s, and like we were children. Like it would have been our parents to stand up and, do that then. Now it's kind of like our turn. So like, we reached out to them and we spoke to different people in the community. And as far as we got was we reached out to, I think it was the American like Motorsports Association, or like the United States Motorsports Association, I think is what it was. And basically they're like a nonprofit, and they work with owners that want to like do something racing, that want to do something related to racing, whether it's like they own a track and they want to bring something back, or they want to build something, and they kind of do like a cost, like they like inspect the market around them and see like, okay, it'll take this much to build or this much to repair or whatever, and then come up with a plan and go, okay, here you go. This is how much it will cost. This is how much you projected to make. So I got as far as reaching out to a source to where if the current owner really wanted to know how much it would cost, which I'm sure he probably did because, he bought it. So I'm sure he, as a business planner and, a business owner would do, I'm sure he already did that. But that was certainly a resources to use if I could like point them together and go, hey guys, talk. Like he could have reached out to them and they could have come out and then inspected the area and go, it cost, this much money to repave and, rebuild, whatever. but that's kind of like the ball's in his court. So that's kind of where we are. The only really new thing was that, which I find interesting, that there's been a few articles that like Mario, he went to the track and somebody coaxed him out and then they walked around, and it wasn't a name drop, but he did kind of hint at like, hey guys, like this is gone. Like, why are you still doing this? Like, support the tracks that are still open, which yes, I agree. So support the tracks that are still open, but you can also, you can do both. Like, you can still want to bring back something that you care about, also at the same time as make sure things that are still alive stay alive. Like, I never quite understood this notion of let it like let laying dogs lie, so, but especially with Pocono being off the schedule and and all that, it just seems, which I don't necessarily blame the community. Like, I've been to 4 out of the how many races that came back, and there was plenty of people there. I mean, it's not like a NASCAR packed field, but I mean, in terms of INDYCAR, like there were still plenty of people there. So I'm not quite sure if it's like a Northeast thing or or whatever. But the final thing I'll note is that the current thing that might be to think about is that since ISC was bought out by NASCAR and there was that merger, it might be interesting to find somebody in the NASCAR community, maybe be like Dale Jr. or something, to where he has a voice with them, that you could make the point that now the legal ties that bind that property are now with NASCAR as opposed to ISC, because they merged because NASCAR bought them. So if you really wanted to go to NASCAR now and be like, hi, maybe Dale Jr. wants to bring back North Wilkesboro, scan for iRacing, whatever. Like, there seems to be some sort of grassroots movement that might be the only hope now, is going to NASCAR. Like, the fans are complaining about there's not enough short tracks. We want more of unique ovals because it's a mile and a half, so it's starting to get boring. Like, there's something to be said. We just need a voice attached to it. So we'll see what we can do.
I love it, man. I will put the link to the public Facebook group in our iTunes show notes here, and along with some pictures and stuff I will put on our social media. But thank you very much for joining us in our first recording of a lost tracks type segment. We'll be doing plenty of these throughout the off season to keep everybody entertained and bring you guys some new content. Tim, thanks for joining me this evening. I look forward to seeing how everything progresses.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me out. I'm always happy to talk about my home track, and anything that can help do something with it, I'm all in for.
Cool. Well, have a great night, man. I appreciate your help.
Thank you. You as well.